In the heart of an ancient forest, far from prying eyes, stood a dilapidated hut. Inside lived a woman named Mira, known among the rare travelers only in whispers as the Forest Witch. One morning, Mira found a basket on her doorstep. Inside, wrapped in an old blanket, slept an infant. The little girl seemed to emit a faint, barely noticeable light, like the sickly flicker of a decaying log in the night. Mira cautiously picked up the child, feeling an involuntary unease, a strange coldness emanating from the tiny body. The air held a barely perceptible scent of decaying earth, though autumn was still far off. Mira entered the house, and the light emanating from the child grew slightly brighter, casting ominous shadows on the log walls. Vasilinka, she whispered, not knowing why she chose that name. It sounded foreign and unfamiliar on her lips. From the first days, Vasilinka behaved strangely. She rarely cried, but her gaze, even when she was a tiny infant, seemed piercing and unchildlike. At night, Mira was awakened by quiet rustling and creaking sounds coming from the cradle. Once, she saw the flowers standing in a clay jug, slowly wilting above the sleeping girl. As Vasilinka grew, the oddities intensified. Milk in the jug soured for no reason. The fire in the hearth went out on its own, and the shadows in the house seemed to live their own lives, contorting into bizarre and frightening shapes. Little Vasilinka often stared at one spot for a long time, and it seemed as if she saw something invisible to Mira. One day, Myra's cat, old and affectionate Morka, disappeared. The witch searched everywhere for her, but found only a tuft of black fur near the child's cradle. From that moment, a cold fear settled in Myra's heart. She began to understand that something was wrong with Vasilinka, that the light surrounding the girl was not a blessing, but rather an ominous sign. That very evening, Vasilinka vanished. Mira found the cradle empty, and the door slightly ajar, as if someone had deliberately left it that way, beckoning the child out. Overcome with anxiety, Mira rushed to the threshold. The moonlight barely pierced the interwoven branches, and the forest seemed full of indistinct rustlings. Soon, Mira noticed small footprints leading into the thicket. Her heart clenched with a bad premonition. She knew that the forest held many dangers at night. Mira followed the tracks, and soon came upon a small clearing. In the center stood Vasilinka, motionless, staring at something Mira could not discern. Around the girl swayed strange, dark figures resembling living shadows. They writhed and flowed into each other, making no sound. Little Vasilinka, usually so calm, seemed frightened. Her small face was pale, and her eyes were wide with terror. One of the shadows slowly reached out to her, as if trying to touch her. At that moment, Vasilinka cried out and rushed back towards the house. Mira sighed with relief, seeing that the girl was unharmed. She hurried to meet Vasilinka to comfort her. "What happened, child?" Mira asked anxiously, embracing the trembling girl. Vasilinka hid her face in the hem of Myra's dress and whispered, "Shadows, scary shadows." Mira held the girl tightly, feeling her own heart pounding with fear. Mira held the trembling Vasilinka close, feeling the small body shudder with fear. "What monsters, child?" Mira asked softly, trying to look into the girl's tear-streaked face. Vasilinka looked up at her with large, tearful eyes. They moved, Grandma, and they had claws and teeth." The girl's voice trembled. "They wanted to take me." Mira felt a chill run down her spine. She had always known that the forest around their hut was not ordinary, but this was too much. She carried Vasilinka back into the house and bolted the door shut. The fire in the hearth burned unevenly, casting restless shadows on the walls. Mira sat the girl on her lap and quietly sang an old lullaby, trying to soothe her. But fear had also settled in her own heart. She saw the fright in Vasilinka's eyes, and that fright seemed very real. Something in the forest had terrified the girl to the core. Mira couldn't sleep much that night. She heard quiet rustling outside the window, the creaking of branches, and every sound seemed like an ominous omen. She held the sleeping Vasilinka tightly, feeling defenseless against the unknown danger. In the morning, Mira decided they couldn't stay in this hut any longer. The forest had begun to seem hostile, and the shadows Vasilinka had seen wouldn't leave her mind. "We will leave," Mira said firmly, looking at the awakened girl. "We will get away from here." Gathering their meager belongings, Mira and Vasilinka left the hut. The old witch held the girl's hand tightly, trying not to look at the dark thicket of the forest, which now seemed hostile to them. The road was long and tiring, but Mira did not stop until the roof of a small house on the outskirts of a neighboring village came into view. Her sister, Annalena, lived there. Alina greeted them with surprise and concern. Seeing Vasilinka's pale face and Myra's worried look, she immediately understood that something was wrong. In Alina's yard, a large black goat named Bim was grazing. Vasilinka eyed him warily, trying to stay close to Mira. Bim snorted and moved his yellow eyes as if sensing something. In the evening, sitting by the warm stove, Mira told Alina about the strange events in the forest hut, about the glow emanating from Vasilinka, and about the terrifying shadows the girl had seen. Alina listened silently, frowning. She had always considered her sister a bit strange with her life in the forest, but now what she heard made her wary. "Shadows, you say?" Alina said thoughtfully, looking at Vasilinka, who was quietly playing with a wooden doll. "Black as night." Vasilinka nodded, clutching the doll to herself. Suddenly, Bim, who had been calmly chewing hay in the corner of the yard, let out a loud, anxious bleat and began to furiously paw the ground, staring towards the forest visible in the distance. All three froze, feeling an unpleasant chill run down their spines. It seemed even the animals sensed something was amiss. Suddenly, Bim's eyes glowed with a strange crimson light. He stopped chewing hay and began to shake his head wildly, his horns glinting dangerously in the moonlight filtering through the window. The goat let out such a piercing, inhuman cry that Mira and Alina's ears rang. He darted around the yard, jumping and bucking as if possessed. "Holy, holy, holy," Alina whispered, crossing herself. "What's wrong with him?" Mira paled. She felt a wave of icy terror wash over her. That cry, it reminded her of the strange voices she had heard in the forest. But suddenly, just as unexpectedly as it had begun, it all stopped. Bim froze in the middle of the yard, breathing heavily. The crimson light in his eyes faded, replaced by the usual yellow. Moments later, the goat behaved as if nothing had happened. He lazily approached Vasilinka, who was watching him fearfully from the window, and nudged his muzzle into her outstretched hand. Vasilinka timidly smiled and stroked his black fur. Bim quieted down and even allowed the girl to play with his horns, pretending to butt heads. Mira and Alina exchanged glances, not understanding what had just happened. Had they both imagined it? Or had they witnessed something truly sinister? "What was that?" Alina asked softly, still breathing heavily. Mira shook her head. "I don't know, but it was connected to the forest. I feel it." Despite Bim calming down and even playing with Vasilinka, the unease in the house did not dissipate. Both women felt that the quiet was deceptive. Something sinister had followed them from the forest. Night fell upon the village, bringing with it a silence broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl. Mira and Alina put Vasilinka to bed in the next room, but they themselves could not close their eyes. Bim's strange behavior kept replaying in their minds. Suddenly, a quiet rustling sound came from the yard. Alina peered out the window. Bim stood in the moonlight, staring fixedly at the house. His eyes glowed again with a faint crimson light. "Mira, look," Alina whispered, stepping back from the window. Mira approached and looked out. The sight was eerie. It seemed the goat was waiting for something or someone. At that moment, The door to Vasilinka's room slowly creaked open. The little girl stood on the threshold, her eyes wide open, but her gaze seemed empty. "Vasilinka, what are you doing?" Mira whispered, but the girl did not answer. She stared silently at the yard, and then Bim spoke. His voice was low, hoarse, and alien, nothing like the bleating of a goat. "Child," the sinister bass rumbled, sending shivers down their spines. "Come to me." Mira and Alina froze in horror. They could not believe their ears. Vasilinka took a step forward. Vasilinka looked at the witches floating in the air, at their strange chants, at the mesmerizing fire of the bonfire. There was no fear in her eyes, only a strange, dark allure. She nodded. In that instant, Bim touched Vasilinka's forehead with his horns. The girl felt a strange, intoxicating energy flow through her body. Her feet lifted off the ground. Vasilinka slowly rose into the air. She floated above the clearing, looking down at the bonfire and the assembled witches. A quiet but melodious sound escaped her lips, gradually merging with the collective chanting. Now she was one of them, a child of the forest, a witch of the night, floating in the air under the sinister light of the moon. Vasilinka floated in the night sky with the other witches. Her childish voice, once quiet, now echoed in unison with their ancient songs, filling the forest thicket with mystical power. Below, by the fire, the black goat Bim watched her, and a sinister fire flickered in his yellow eyes. The girl, once found on the doorstep of a forest hut, had finally found her true place. She had become part of the darkness, part of the ancient magic of this forest. Her childhood had ended, giving way to a new, dark chapter of her existence. Now she was one of them, a forest witch floating in the night, and her voice had forever merged with the whisper of the trees and the songs of the shadows.